Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Tom Roberts from Riff Raff.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I think we're keeping up with our biweekly schedule pretty well.
Pretty well. And will there be a special live recorded podcast next week? By which I mean we will be in the same room.
Well, hopefully we could just do it at my local dive bar.
I mean, if ambient noise is not a problem.
There's actually the microphone will segue that out. I'm sure that Cavalries would really love to have some people in there drinking whiskey and talking shit.
Well, I assume Brian will be around. We
Yeah.
can just have him sort of in the background, shushing everybody the entire time.
I got shushed at the LA Penn Gala this last week, which is a bad segue, but reminds me, anytime anyone says shushing, that's the only thing that's going to come to mind now.
Anyway.
So that we'll have a live one next, I guess it's next Monday, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So So you're coming up to visit stores.
Coming through the area to visit stores, correct. So, yeah.
That would be very cool. So we had, I don't know if there's anything, there wasn't a lot of things that we were going to talk about today, but there was the one article from the Atlantic that I have a bit of a backstory about that's like sort of confidential, but maybe not really. And like we could talk about the AWP thing. I guess I've been gone for 2 weeks. I feel very out of touch. I was at the Words Without Borders gala on at the end of October 30th to get the Ottaway Award. And that was wild and fun and pretty crazy. And then went right from there to the Los Angeles to the Penn Gala because I was on the translation prize jury. So our payment was to get a free ticket to the gala, which was pretty over the top. Because the Words Without Borders gala is far beyond any gala I've ever been to before in my life. They had very fancy, very nice space, great whole program, lots of great stuff, and it was fun, and it was very rewarding and really enjoyable, and so many cool people were there. And then the Penn one in LA was in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. There's lots of movie stars. They had a little red carpet sort of thing, which they did at Words Without Borders too, but this red carpet had 10 different photographers, and if it was a famous person, all 10 would be taking pictures and selling them online. And when it was me and Ross Uffberg, it would be just one person taking pictures, and our picture is available for free online, so that's cool. But it was a very elaborate affair, and also went on for 900,000 hours. We actually ended up leaving because it was just too much. But it was pretty fun. I told you this story in brief, but I got seated next to, well, not by accident. I was just sitting at our table, which is a little bit far away, and this woman came and sat down with her husband, who turns out won the prize for drama for a play that he wrote. And his name is Dan O'Brien, and he actually wrote a play about the Fox sisters that premiered here in Rochester at the Jiva Theater. So he had this great connection about that. But his wife turned out to be, she's well, my name is Jessica, and I'm a comedian and an actress. And I was well, what's your last name? She's St. Clair. I was Jesus Christ, I know you from How Did This Get Made? I know that you hate post-apocalyptic movies because there's too many trash cans on fire and all this weird shit about, you thought you had Fabergé eggs everywhere and that they were just a common household item in the 80s. All these weird things from, listening to that show religiously. And we ended up, hitting it off and having a lot of fun, entertaining each other during this, excruciatingly long awards ceremony to the point where we did get shushed. That was where the shushing came from.
It's a long humble brag right there.
Yeah, it was crazy, dude. It was the best thing. I was just this is awesome. I didn't expect to meet anyone lots of cool people, but no one that was a celebrity cool person that just happened to be there. And we ended up I've talked to her husband since because the plays, and we did the book on the Fox sisters, so we exchanged some information. And they were really great people, but it was cool to be in that situation. But yeah, sure, I'll take it though. I don't get a humble brag often, dude. I live in Rochester.
You do live in Rochester, yeah. So I think you briefly mentioned the article as a lead-in here, but the article you're talking about is. Do you want to introduce it? You sent it to me.
It's the hottest trend in American literature isn't from the U.S., but what's super funny is when you go to type that into the Atlantic or into your search bar, the original title of this article was "The National Book Awards Haul Translators Out of Obscurity." I'm not not sure how anyone would feel about this, about that. But it's from Liesl Schillinger, and she had interviewed. This is the backstory that's like sort of whatever. She had interviewed me not a long time ago, but some time ago, under the auspice that she was writing this long article for the Atlantic about translation, and it was going to include a lot about the Ottaway Award and about Open Letter's 10th anniversary and all the other things. And I got her in touch with like Amy Stoles at the NEA, and she wrote like a really long article, I guess, that was a more investigative and more comprehensive about the state of translated publishing in America. And then they nixed that and wanted just this. That ended up being, I mean, it's very condensed and like has a lot of gaps that I think she would have filled in with more room, and is mostly just about the National Book Awards and translation.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to complain about an article like this that is mainly there just to do service to translations writ large, but it definitely comes off a little bit like a puff piece for the National Book Awards.
Yeah.
Translation, which is fine, but I mean, we both know the writer. I mean, you sat for an interview with her, but I've known her, for years, just in and around New York and publishing and whatnot. I mean, she would definitely probably have much rather written something more investigative like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Instead, we just get a sort of gloss of the sort of the recent history of translations published in the United States and the sort of cultural capital that they have and to whom, basically. So my first question for you, do you agree with her sort of timeline history as she lays it out?
Of the 15 years of like this growth over the past 15 years. So yes and no. So I always go back to when I was at Delkey, I think it was in 2003, was the article America Yawns at Foreign Fiction, as being like a starting point of like where after that moment is when like Words Without Borders and everything started changing that narrative from Americans yawn at foreign fiction to something a little bit more concrete. And that sort of meshes with what she's saying, starting with with Words Without Borders, and then saying that within the first decade of the century, there are the three bestsellers according to her, but I think there are more than that. I think Out Stealing Horses should be on here as well. And that there's a launch of all these nonprofit presses doing translated literature, from Archipelago Books, which was 15 years ago, Europa, Open Letter, New Vessel, Restless, Deep Vellum, and Transit. That all matches. But yeah. Which part in specific do you mean?
So I don't remember who it is exactly she mentions, but I think it's Jhumpa Lahiri, Juno Diaz, and somebody else.
Yeah.
Who are American at this point, for all intents and purposes, at the very least writing in mostly English. Juno, I think, does something different.
Yeah.
But basically writing their novels in English for the American market, right?
Yeah.
And what she, sort of claims is that, but because they're so foreign in their upbringing and cultural sort of history, or at least half foreign, they were bringing those worlds to their writing in America, publishing them in America and they were successful. I mean, that's a huge part of this.
Yeah.
And that sort of made American readers, editors, publishers sort of hungry for more from the outside world.
Yeah, her exact line is, although they wrote in English, and the authors were Shangrai Li, Edward Jadandikot, Jhumpa Lahiri, Gary Steingart, Khalid Hosseini, and Juno Diaz, and says, although they wrote in English, they were translating foreign cultures through their fiction. In the process, they created a flourishing literary hybrid that broadened domestic reading tastes. That part, yeah, I'm not so sure that I buy into that. But there's a more controversial statement of hers. So she does do these two things of like, one, there's translation presses and a growth in the number of presses and the number of people who are doing things to promote these books. That is one thing. And then the second thing being the American tastes changed because they were no longer so exclusively American, which seems a little bit more suspect to put them together. The most like direct section of that is the paragraph that says, in 2018, American literature no longer means literature written by Americans, for Americans, about America. It means literature that, wherever it comes from, whatever nation it describes, American readers recognize as relevant to them, as familiar. Foreign is no longer foreign. And sure I understand exactly what that means, but I don't know that I completely agree with it because it feels sort of like, well, if Americans really respond to this, then it just counts as our literature. But like, then why are you even labeling it as American literature? Why aren't we just talking about literature as a whole or world literature? Or there's some other different term, like just throwing American in there and saying that it's no longer just American; it can be anything Americans like. Feels a little bit like like it doesn't really mean anything specific enough to like be a formal argument or a formal statement.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of who she might mean by that, if not the people that we just mentioned that she had already cited. Who,
Yeah.
which, I mean, sure they're American writers, but to say that there's something, I don't know if there's anything beyond that, right? Like
I
the
don't
argument
either.
that there's no such thing as American literature, it's whatever we want it to be, is such kind of American exceptionalism in a weird way.
Yeah, that's yeah, exactly, exactly. There's a few things like that that are like I don't know if I really agree with this. Like Lisa Lucas's comment that like the books, it doesn't matter who wins. This isn't a competition. It's all about where is that line? The prize is not
Uh,
a competition, but an affirmation. That quote. I feel like this is a little shade, shade being thrown towards our podcast, which I'm more than willing to accept because Lisa's great and she's doing a fantastic job, and I love this. Here's the whole paragraph. That's why Lucas prefers to avoid the word best when she discusses the prize contenders. There are always going to be people who object to which books are chosen, she says. They'll say this should have been on the long list, this should have been on the finalist list, or this or that book should have won. To her mind, all the books win because the act of nominating them generates energy, conversation, and critique. The prize is not a competition, but an affirmation. I don't know how much I go into that, but there's also like an earlier statement where it was basically like, yeah, that she says, there's no trend in publishing that inspired this prize. We didn't say, oh man, got to get into that Fronte fever. She jokes, this is a permanent prize. But books like these make all translated books rise. A person who has a great experience reading an author from another country in translation is more likely to go to a bookstore and look for another, which is another like something that gets debated a lot, or people go back and forth on how that want that to happen, but it might not happen. And when does it really happen? Does it happen just with like best-selling books? Does it happen with just like Scandinavian noir, or is there really like a translation causes other translations to sell, or is it that a type of book causes other types of books to sell?
I mean, you know, as somebody who witnesses this every day, it's clearly the latter. I mean, it's not to say that I don't have customers who sort of seek out things in translation or whatever, but I mean, quite honestly, they're like freelance reviewers and things. They're book
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
like our customers who just like reading good books. I mean, it's like they jump from translated to not translated to whatever their friends recommending. They're not saying, oh, hey, I read this book from whatever, Columbia. Now I'm going to go seek something out, and they stumble upon a book from, Romania. That just
right.
doesn't really happen.
It has to be like thematic
Right.
or genre related or
Right. I mean,
just buzz related.
there's so much more than the fact that a book is translated.
Yeah, yeah, and
Film,
it's a bummer because people always want it to be the other. Like, well, Fronte's so good now, everyone's going to read Italian fiction, but like, I don't. That just doesn't ever seem to. It never seems to really pan out in terms of the data.
right, right. And it's, again, these things are so, art is so particular to itself. Like each piece of art that, like, yes, Scandinavian noir became a thing because, yeah, they're all kind of interchangeable, right? Like some of the writers are better than others, but there's a certain plot similarity to each
Yeah,
one. There's definitely a mood that's caused by the culture and the environment and all of that sort of thing. They're also copying each other. Let's be realistic.
hmm,
And that all makes sense to read that as a genre, right?
yeah,
But just translated, I don't know. That's a hard one.
yeah. It really is. That's what we had. Anthony came in yesterday. And he's like, I don't understand why people always. He's like, the more books of ours that I read, I don't understand where people are like, your books are difficult. He's like, I'm reading 77 by Guillermo Sacamano, and it's just a noir book. Like, it's a straightforward noir book. There's nothing complicated about it or like off-putting in any way, shape, or form. Um, which goes to show that there are like varieties of books within the catalog, and that could fit into other sorts of genres or other sorts of like reading paths.
Right. Yeah. People. people have to make decisions about what they're going to review and read and all these sorts of things. And once they've picked up on a sort of shorthand for making that decision, they're going to stick with it until they're proven otherwise, you know? And that's people have these perceptions about certain publishers if they pay attention at all. And, you know, it'll take something special to make them break out of it. It's finding the people who aren't, you know, with that, don't have that pre-existing bias. That's the challenge for all of the publishers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. But I mean, it's good. It's good that that Atlantic is claiming that the hottest trend in American literature is international literature. That's cool.
Right. Sure. Did you? I guess it's better than. Oh God, I've already forgotten what it's called. Uplit. Uplit.
Oh, fuck that. Yeah. Just fuck that straight away. That. Yeah. We didn't talk about that before, did we? Or did we?
No, I don't. It's not worth talking about.
No, it's absolutely not.
No.
It should not exist.
Did you? The thing at the end, I thought that Liesel did with mentioning Jhumpa Lahiri as the translator.
Yeah.
Do you think that was shade or it's hard to tell?
Oh no, I thought that she's really saying that the only reason that that's on the cover is because people know her name more than they know Dominic Startione, and that,
Okay.
that there's like maybe people read the book because of the translator and not because of the author as being like a sort of positive.
Okay.
I
I
didn't
just
I didn't see it that way, but I could see how it could be that way too.
right.
A
It's
little bit of shade towards the other people for not putting their titles on the authors on the front cover, which I don't know that we're going to continue doing, to be honest. We're playing around with new design ideas to make things cleaner and not putting a lot of information on the back.
that's interesting. I just look. I loved this book, and I think the package is beautiful and everything. But I don't know. Do you have a copy of Jenny Habal's?
No,
Uh,
I saw it when I was traveling around, but I didn't end up buying it anywhere.
but it's got a very clean cover, right? It's
Yeah,
got some sort of very dark art painting reproduced that sort of wraps around to the back. Just says Paradise Rot, her name. I don't even think it says a novel. Translator is not mentioned. And the back cover is like a blurb from Chris Kraus, and then that's about it.
yeah.
There's no plot summary, which is very frustrating because I keep telling customers to pick it up and it'll be good. And the plot is like weird to begin with. So it's hard for me to explain what it is.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? So it's better if like sometimes people they're already holding the book. It'd be so much easier if they just read what the plot was after I said it was really good. And there's no plot in there. It's, you know, like buried in like the French flaps or something like that.
It is.
So,
It is on the French flaps. So, did you end up listening to her music?
no, not yet. I had
Uh,
another customer come in and was like, "Oh, I'll buy this. I love her music." I was like, "Okay, yeah." So I have
yeah.
to figure it out. Find it on Spotify, I guess.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's your thing or not, but it could be.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, a little aside here. So we play a lot of like, I don't want to say super obscure, but it's definitely like obscure post-punk and punk music. Like, you know, it's not like a greatest hits thing. These are like, you know, full albums by bands I really like that I know, but that, you know, people probably haven't heard in a while. And so people will hear like two or three songs and be like, "Oh, did you make the playlist? You might like X." And it's like, God, everybody has to recommend fucking music to bars. It's like, you know, when you have a DJ and, you know, the DJ is like just assaulted with requests the entire night or something like that. Very rarely do I end up liking the music that people think I will like, I will say.
Oh,
But
I'm not recommending that you would like this. I'm saying I
no,
don't think it seems like your sort of thing.
yeah. No, I understand that. It just made me think of,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've done that.
interact.
I've done that at my local bar sometimes when it's like just like two or three of us and they're playing whatever. They'll just start adding songs to the list, but that's a different situation.
Yeah. Yeah. If you've only come in once and you hear one song and then immediately start telling me that I might like the night, and oh, the best thing is they tell me I might like things, and it's like, you know, the things that are up next in the queue. It's like, yeah.
I thought you were going to say they say you might like things like Fall Out Boy.
Oh God,
There's this
no.
One Direction song that's really just like it's earworm. It's amazing. Oh dear. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about this article. Except I'm glad that they did something. I'm a little disappointed because like I thought it would be like the one big article that would come out related to the award and help raise Open Letters' profile, and that didn't happen at all. But that's neither here nor there in the greater scheme of things. So that's cool. Like, I'm glad that it exists. Who's gonna win tomorrow? It's tomorrow. This will go live on Wednesday if I can turn it around in the 20 minutes I have before I have to leave. But who's gonna win the National Book Award for translation?
I have forgotten who is on the short
I will
list.
I'll read the short list. I'll also tell you that they decide apparently the day of as well, like the National Book Critics
For
Circle.
a logistical thing, like they have to get the people in the same room.
Well, all the people have to be there. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and all the judges have to be there, and they all meet at a variety of different restaurants and discuss who's going to win that day. So, or maybe it's the night before. Like, it might be tonight that they have their meeting, and then whatever. But it's all decided like last minute. So probably they don't even know at this moment. The 5 books are Love by Hannah Orstavik, translated from the Norwegian by Martin Aiken, Disoriental by someone whose name isn't listed here, translated from the French by Tina Cover. That is weird. Trick by Domenico Starchinone, translated from the Italian by Jimpo Lahiri. The Emissary by Yoko Tawada, translated from the Japanese by Margaret Mitsutani. And Flights by Olga Tokarczyk, translated from the Polish by Jennifer Croft.
Right. Yes, I did just have an email from Barbara about, Tawada. Anyway, I think Flights is probably going to win, don't you?
I think Emissary is going to win.
Really? Interesting.
I wouldn't be surprised if Trick wins because of the playing up like to the biggest audience. Like there's. I was talking to someone yesterday. I don't name exactly, but we were talking a little bit about this because they'd heard our National Book Awards podcast in which I lost my mind for 10 minutes or whatever. And they're like, they're like, we really just heard that and wish we could have just, the person was like, I wish I could have just sat down and had a drink with you. And, whenever I have to do things, I have to keep in mind that like to get anything like this done, there's like a series of huge compromises. Like Lisa Lucas can't just do a good prize for this without having to negotiate through all of these other big presses and other forces that are at work. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the Jimpo Lahiri translation wins just solely because that would be the biggest name affiliated with it and give it like a huge platform. And that as they say, this isn't about the best book. It's about affirming things.
Yeah, I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about whether or not I think that is a good thing.
I'm not saying it's good.
Yeah.
I'm saying it exists.
You don't think it's a little weird? If you were a translator, if you were somebody who is a professional translator who toils in the obscurity for the most part, and a very good writer, don't get me wrong, this is not like some hack writer decides she wants to try her hand at translating, suddenly translates a book and gets tons of praise for it, even though it's her first translation. It's, she didn't really have to. I'm sure it was not hard for her to convince someone to publish that book. Wouldn't you? And then she wins an award right off the bat. Wouldn't you, as a translator, feel a little resentment?
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. The reason I think Tawada would win, but I think it might look weird since Susan Bronowski's on the jury.
Oh, right.
But it's not her translation, but it's one of her authors that she works with and has for years. So that might ring a little bit like iffy. And then Flights, I think, would win, but like it just won the Man Booker. If it wins this too, like what designates the National Book Award as being separate from the Man Booker?
Right.
Or like just wanting to be that. So in that case, like then fall down to these other ones. I don't know that Love has enough there, and Disoriental quite possibly. That's the dark horse. But I just wouldn't be surprised. Also, Dominic Startnone is Mr. Ferrante, I believe. So you've got a lot of things at play there.
Interesting. Mr. Ferrante?
Yeah, I think that's her husband.
What?
You think I'm wrong?
Also a pen name?
Yeah. No. That like her real name. I think that this is her real life husband.
I understand that. So is the name on the book, is that a pen name?
No.
Otherwise,
that's his real name.
Then how it cannot be hard to figure out who Elena Ferrante is.
No, I think they only know because once they found out who Elena Ferrante was, this was the husband. Remember when they had that whole long report? Yeah, Startnone is married to Anita Raja. The literary translator is said to be the author Elena Ferrante in a report from Italian investigative journalist Claudio Gatti in 2016. I didn't remember what Elena Ferrante's real name was. I will forget it the second I close this window.
Yep.
It's just never gonna stick. It's Elena Ferrante, and I don't give a shit about the rest of her life at all. But that's who this person is. So it's like would add into what you're saying too. It's kind of crazy that like it would be like Jubal Lahiri's first translation, big name from like someone who's like also probably not gonna have a hard time getting. I mean, he's a well respected author to begin with, but like a little added bonus there.
Yeah, it's a little too incestuous. Is that the right word here?
Maybe.
Maybe. I don't know.
Or what's the other? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. But
Nepotism.
Nepotism. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who cares? It'll be fun for someone to win tomorrow night, and they'll be very excited about it. And then you guys will sell about 2,000 more copies of that book.
Yeah.
which is more than most. It's definitely more than most. The only other thing that I had that I sent to you is like if anyone is following along with this AWP stuff, there's a huge article about AWP that came out in the Los Angeles Review of Books yesterday from Christian Teresi, who had been at AWP, which is the Associated Writing Programs nonprofit that exists mostly to help MFA programs, but mostly through the form of like a giant conference that takes place every year. And last year, at the end of the conference, the director, David Fenza, who had been there for 29 years, was summarily fired in like a 5-minute meeting from the board with no explanation as to why. And it's still like unclear as to why they let him go in like that way and like what happened. And I think people naturally assume the worst, especially given our current cultural moment. And this article sort of makes it a little bit muddy, where it's like, that doesn't seem to be necessarily the case, that it was like a sexual harassment or hostile work environment. Although I've heard both of those things from other people that are not in this article and that are not people I could source, but that say that it wasn't the best of situations. So it's probably partially that, partially something else. But it's a fascinating article if you're interested in like nonprofit literary organizations and how they can be really easily damaged, but also like the running of them is very complicated because they're what seems to be the main criticism behind this piece is that their board is like made up of professors, which is probably not great. And they're making decisions in odd ways and not in a way that like a normal board of like a especially of a corporation, but of like a more functional board would make. And it just seems like a chaotic environment. And if this is one of the biggest nonprofit literary organizations in the country, it's crazy that they'd be in a situation where it feels like uncertain and everything could fall apart because of like the inability of the board to keep things going or because of staffing issues or whatever. And there's like lots of interesting details in this long article about like their finances and how they function. So like they were trying to hire people to work for them in DC with like half the salary of like where people could work elsewhere in DC, and like one of the largest markets in the world, where they were getting paid in 2005 a full-time position. AWP paid $27,000 a year. And in the first year, this guy got a raise or got moved up to be director of conferences and made $45,000. And that's like the reality of the situation and of nonprofits in some ways. Their budget is like $3.5 million now. There was a 1.8 million in 2008, so they've almost doubled it in 10 years. So you can see like lots of interesting details about that. And I found it fascinating. Like whatever went on there, it's probably partially mismanagement and partially like someone did things that were causing a horrible work environment. There's probably both, right? In some way, whatever, more of one or more of the other. But regardless, it's really interesting to me to see like all the kind of inner working details of the numbers and of like how they grew and what their staff situation was. I also just think that anytime that there's like a lot of academics on a board of directors, that is a red flag.
This article, again, mainly for the reasons that you've stated, but I think this is really fascinating to see the sort of expansion of AWP as an organization, its influence, the MFA programs as a whole, and the amount of money involved in it, in bearing in mind that all of this is for a nonprofit dedicated to literary arts, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking like they were in deficit in 1995.
Yeah.
And had to like get out of that hole, cut staff, take pay cuts for the people who stayed. This guy did all this. Then, by slowly in a few years, they get back to, having a surplus, a little bit of money in the bank. Slowly they have, $4 million budget, $500,000 or $5 million in the bank, in investments, all this sort of stuff. 500 institutional members, 50,000 individual members, i.e. writers, and 10,000 people who go to the conference every year. All of this, within the last 15, 20 years is remarkable.
Yeah.
And of course, very untenable because they have a board that is self-appointing and done by mostly people at the heads of various writing programs from universities around the country, i.e. people without business experience, without proper sort of managerial experience for the staff that is part of the full-time staff at the headquarters, wherever it is now. Where is it now?
It was at the University of Maryland, but they left. And it's not clear. This raises some questions about why they left after like 14 months there.
Right.
So I think they're independent, and I don't know where. I think they're still located in the same region, just not at a university anymore.
So all of this to say, like, running a literary arts, nonprofit, especially one as large as this, is just an incredible challenge. And if you don't have just the right people in there, you're making it even harder. And then to put I'm talking about the staff, and then to put a board above that who sort of oversees the whole thing with unbelievable amounts of power, with no real experience doing any of this stuff either, is just wow. I mean, you're just asking for trouble, and it finally caught up to them. Looking like, basically. So yeah, maybe it was Fenz's fault for something. Maybe it's the board's fault for handling it in an unbelievably poor fashion. And where do they go from here? It seems like, I don't know. I don't know what they can possibly do to, they've created a lot of ill will from members.
Yeah.
That said, those 10,000 aspiring poets who are 22 years old are probably still going to go to the conference every year.
I'm sure they're going to. I mean, this year's conference should be kind of interesting for that very reason.
Right.
To see like what kind of shakes out. But yeah, it's just like, it's like the worst sort of PR. Like they just couldn't get that right. Like how to if you're going to get rid of him, and you could do it in so many other ways that would have caused less of a huge kerfuffle. They could have, like, use a really out of date term, but they could have easily just been like, we're getting rid of you, but what we're going to do is say you're retiring, you get blah blah blah, we'll announce it in this way and just let it all go. And he sort of, Christian alludes to that, like that would have been one smart option, but like the way that it came out and the way that they just kind of don't say anything about it and never explain themselves makes the whole thing seem really dysfunctional.
Yeah, and then they just went on radio silence, and there were all these petitions and calls for answers and all this sort of things from members, not just like a general public, but like member institutions, and nothing, just silence. No attempts to explain themselves. It's very dysfunctional is the short way of explaining it. I don't know. I feel bad for the people who got forced out in such a way without explanation, even if they were guilty of sort of whatever, creating a bad work environment. They're still, it creates bad precedent to just fire the person on the spot,
Yeah, especially when they're like given 29 years to the organization.
Right.
29 years, you'd think you get a little bit more respect.
Right. Or at least like a proper investigation.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they did do something like that, they just haven't shared it with anyone.
Right.
And that could make a huge difference, but it doesn't feel to me like they actually did anything like that. It feels like something else happened.
Right. It's interesting that it's written from this guy's point of view, because he used to work there, but his way of sort of attacking the PW article that came out, was interesting to read because he feels personally hurt by that article. He really lays into it and says, not sure that she confirmed any of this stuff. She claims that she did, but she wouldn't offer any of it, et cetera, et cetera. And he makes all of these allegations about like board members just doing things to further their own careers and things like that like no actual journalist would write because there's no evidence of it, right?
Yeah.
but he says it because he's just basically, this is basically a very long op-ed.
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of a defense of himself.
Right, right. Which is an interesting thing to publish for the LARB. But
and it's funny. So I know Claire Kirch, but what's super funny is, you know what the title of the article is? The PW article?
no.
It's "Was a hostile work environment behind the firing of AWP's David Fenza?" ?
So yes.
Yeah,
isn't that like journalism 101? If you want to make an allegation without making an allegation, you ask a question,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Like, there's no other way to read that than just be like, oh, so there's a hostile
Right.
work environment. Oh,
Right.
man.
Is Donald Trump a pig fucking alien? I don't know. You know, like,
Wow, that's a new level. That's a new level of political content for the 3% podcast.
is it that surprising?
No.
Probably.
No, definitely not. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. At some point, we do want to do more with talking about like nonprofit stuff, and like the sort of problems, the difficulties, the challenges, all that kind of thing that we've gone through before, but not recently. There's always new things to add to it, or new wrinkles in like what's going on. Right down to like what happens with the NEA, to like the fact that there's a new generation of nonprofit presses and how they relate to past generations of nonprofit presses, and where the knowledge of fundraising has gone or not gone over the past like 25 years, which is I'm very interested in right now, but we're not going to talk about it today, obviously.
Right. There's also the way that fundraising has shifted because of the crowdsourced sort of way of doing it, right?
And the big philanthropists don't give money to the arts anymore.
Right. So all of that it is very interesting. I forget where I was looking at the other day. Somebody's, maybe it was for Winter Institute. That doesn't sound right, but like a program of a list of book related things, and there was definitely something in there about like crowdsourcing.
Oh.
And it's now become so ubiquitous as a sort of fundraising tool and all of that. I don't know. I think it's definitely shifting the way people think about what a nonprofit is, because they feel that there's a little bit more transparency, and that they've given, and that they understand the way these things work, and they think that they understand everything, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit. There's another thing that you're referring to in a way too, is that like things like Patreon really blur the line between a nonprofit entity and just a creative act. So like the idea that crowdfund things that are creative acts or creative programs or things that you want to have exist is still different than a formal nonprofit entity. And because of those two things are really blurred now, it doesn't, the weight behind like the fact that you're a nonprofit publishing house doing X, Y, and Z is diluted, because people are like, yeah, I give $5 a month to like this podcast online. It's kind of the same thing. And it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. You know what I mean? Like it's changed the way that people think of what a nonprofit arts organization can do, especially in literature, when everything's being crowdfunded, and that's where everyone's giving their money to like their own little things that they get for free, instead of larger amounts of money going to larger institutions to do larger programming.
Right. Everything has become more micro-focused on, you see a lot of Indiegogo campaigns or whatever for like one specific book, or like one specific edition or record or whatever. And it loses track of the fact that that whole organization still has to exist in order to do these things, and that there's corporate organizations are given nonprofit status because they're promoting something for the general good, right? Yeah. According to the government's whatever standards. And what that means is so much more than creating one product, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it means paying your salary. It means paying for the promotion of art, for the sustainability of an arts culture.
Right.
And that's not something you can crystallize into like a 1 month small campaign for $20,000 to do X, right? And that is where like the disconnect has happened, and that people don't quite understand what even one as small as Open Letter right? With what, 3 employees?
Yep.
Like, and the support of an institute like a university, your mission is so much bigger than probably what people could even possibly understand, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it's tricky to sort of try to tell people, here's what we do. They immediately start not paying attention.
I
And
know. And the university sponsors only like a third of our budget. It's not like I think people assume like that if you're at a university, they're just paying 100% of what
right.
your expenses are, and that is absolutely not the case. Like we are right now, like I'm sending out the letters and starting the whole campaign for our year-end donation, which we hope to get a few $1,000s. We'd love to get far more than that, but we just don't. People have not traditionally donated much to us, despite the fact that we do like these podcasts that are free and all this stuff that we're doing for students and for interns from all over the world that come to us over the summer and work with us, and all the books and all the 3% articles and reviews and promotion of translators and trying to advocate on their behalf to get better award recognition and money and whatever else. Like all that's part of the nonprofit missions, which is why we rely on donations from everyone, from individuals and from governments and from private foundations, from all those different sources. But yeah, we're just starting that up. So if anyone's listening actually does want to donate, if you go to openletterbooks.org, there's a donate button at the top, and it goes through the U of R system. So they give you the formal letter for the whole tax deductible donation, and it's all very, very clean and very, very user friendly. You just have to say that you're donating to Open Letter, not to, I don't know, the English department. But yeah, it's always a stressful thing.
Right. And it's weird because in some ways people understand that like the NEA does essentially what you're doing, just on a much larger scale and from a more managerial sort of level, for lack of a better term. They're giving you money to do what they like doing too, basically.
Yeah.
Right? And so people sort of understand that because like when politicians threaten to slash the NEA funding, people get all up in, arms.
Yeah.
But or with like if libraries are threatened to close, it's like, well, what do you think a library does? It promotes reading culture, period. You're doing the same thing, just focused on one particular aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
And all these other nonprofit publishers are doing the same thing. All these nonprofit art centers are maybe doing the same thing. And yet people don't quite understand that all of that requires a lot more money than the, $10
I know.
that shipping to publish a book with a fancy cover.
Yep. There is related to this is the thing that I've been thinking about a lot is there used to be a guy named Jim Sitter was very heavily involved in like the creation of the Council of Literary Magazines and Presses, which is now the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses, and to help out small presses and nonprofits, but also he was integral to making the Minneapolis funding scene, where those presses in Minneapolis that are nonprofits are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations from a few major corporations. And he sort of made that all happen. He also made like Lila Wallace fund a lot of nonprofit presses and the Mellon Foundation at a point in time, and helped create like that atmosphere of fundraising. And unfortunately, I know Jeffrey Leppendorf, who I know you know too, is sort of like his heir in a sense because he's got all the knowledge and knows the stories and has the connections and the ability to crystallize the argument for nonprofit literature in a way that most people don't. But aside from him, like we don't really have people doing that anymore. Everyone's working in their own little silo, and there's no one that like the message of nonprofit literature is a little bit too it's just too vague right now. It doesn't have the right spokespeople or spokesperson or a person who just has the knowledge to be like, hey guys, I'm going to convene you and tell you 15 presses that here are some opportunities for people who are working at foundations that don't currently fund literature, but if you talk to them and you give them this information, I've primed them to know like what the issues are and how they could do a very little amount to help in a big way. So go get them. Like anything like that, that's not really active right now. And that's what I've started to become very concerned with over the past couple of weeks, that's necessary for a lot of these presses to continue onwards, not just Open Letter, but like the next generation of them, the Transits, the Deep Vellums that really like, I mean, maybe Deep Vellum has an advantage because they can be in a silo of Dallas where there's a ton of money for this, but a lot of other people just aren't connected and we aren't talking, and there's not a national profile at this moment for nonprofit publishing, I don't think.
Right. Especially, I mean, everybody got a little too comfortable with like getting their NEA money and whatever their small, like everybody seemed to have had one angel donor back in the day, right?
Yeah.
that generation, I mean, this is the sad reality. That generation of people are dying, right? And
And the new Silicon Valley people are donating less to the arts than any other generation
exactly
ever.
right, exactly. So
There's also, and this is a controversial statement, and I don't know if I believe in it, but I'm going to say it, is that part of the reason that the nonprofit arts message for literature, nonprofit literary arts message is a little bit diluted too, is because of the super success of like Grey Wolf, Coffee House, Copper Canyon, maybe Copper Canyon to a more specific like poetry related audience. But the Grey Wolf and Coffee House being so enormously successful, and Archipelago seemingly being very successful, whether or not that's accurate in terms of their budget is to a matter. There's kind of moot because people see them as having been very, very successful thanks to Knausgaard. Um, that makes it seem like they, as a nonprofit, you can operate in the same marketplace as anyone else can, and sort of makes the message harder to convey on a national scale for non successful presses of that level. Maybe. Does this make sense?
now, what do you mean by like national scale?
Like to just like potentially national funders. Right now, there's no one funding literature on a national basis except for the NEA. So there used to be foundations that would fund people from anywhere. Now they only fund you if you're local, if you're regional. So Minneapolis presses or Minneapolis foundations fund people if you're based in Minneapolis, but nowhere else. And there's no one like even if there's like national like donors, like individual philanthropists aren't donating in like that Broadway unless you get them on your board, I guess. But there's not this awareness on like a national scale that these foundations like Mellon or Lila Wallace or Annenberg or ones that do like funding across all 50 states, that they're also including literature. MacArthur, they don't include literary nonprofit publishing. And they have at points in time, but they don't anymore.
Right. That's
And
interesting.
and I wonder if like on like well on even on an individual message level, like if we're like we need funding to be able to do this, they're like, well, Grey Wolf, they get funding too, but their budget's over $5 million. They're like a giant press. Like that it's so in some ways I wonder if that doesn't hurt it because it's good for Grey Wolf and that's great that they've been able to grow so dramatically over the past 20 years and there's nothing to take away from that. I just wonder if they're the leading voice for it, there's a lot of people that are far below that level that aren't growing um, anymore, and that there's something off there, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to even talk about it. So this might be all just rambling and just precursor to some later thing, but it feels like there's a missing thing that used to be there when I was at Delkey, where there was more of a cohesion of like these nonprofit groups sort of exchanging information, working together, and creating a more tailored message that bounced off one another to promote the idea of funding for nonprofit literature.
Right.
Who
No, I don't.
knows?
I mean, it makes sense to me, but it's because I've worked in for a in a public
Yeah.
space, it's that sort of thing. And of course, know Jeffrey and what CLMP does and all of that. And yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. It feels like, I mean, it's not really exactly the same because, we're a for-profit business and we could, have a string of incredibly busy nights at the bar and it erases all concerns and there's nothing to worry about. But, there's like an incubation period for new businesses
Hmm.
where they need time to be active, to be in existence as opposed to being in a planning stage
Yeah.
while having the security of funding to figure out their shit, right? Like to get
Yeah.
their shit together. And for a lot of the smaller presses, it's really critical in those first few years before they sort of figure things out, to have the chance to grow at their own rate and to sort of figure things out on their own, um, instead of expected to become Grey Wolf overnight,
Yeah.
and that's I feel like the challenge in the nonprofit world is having that funding for that first 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, that's always been the 5 year mark has been a huge one for a while. Like if you can make it through five, you can usually make it through 10.
Right.
But then it starts to get dicier. And it really does seem to be that like people who make it longer have one gigantic hit, and that gets their profile raised, so they get donors because donors like to give money to people who are successful, and it also gives them money through that. There's just the sales of that book, on and on and on, especially if it's like a good backlist selling title. And that's the thing that terrifies me, because we don't have that. And I don't know if that's going to come. And that's the thing, that if we don't get that, I don't know how we grow. And if we don't grow, your budget from the amount that you get from NEA is frequently related to like your overall budget. So if your overall budget isn't going up, you're just going to get less money. Um, I don't, and the people who are listening from NEA might say that that's not completely accurate. But if you sort of mapped like the awards to budgets for literature, there's a good correlation between size and the amount that you get from NEA. So that's it's just a terrifying proposition that if you can't jump up, you could be stuck at like like that middle level that's really hard to maintain, which sort of comes up a lot on our recent conversations of like being in the middle is almost impossible. It's easier to be really, really small or like bigger. But if we could double in size, I think we would be amazing and able to accomplish a lot of stuff and be very, very, very viable. But to be able to do that, we have to have something sell 20,000 copies within the next year. And then maybe that triggers some people to donate things. We get more money from the NEA, start to grow. Books all sell like an extra 6,000 or 600, 700,000 copies. And all of a sudden it starts to happen the way that it did for Grey Wolf when they had the Pierre Pedersen books take off. But without that, like this is what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, no, and with good reason, unfortunately. Look, same reason we have a day where, we barely crack $500 of sales because it's pouring rain out. It keeps me up at night, so.
Fucking blows.
Yes.
Well, I know that you have to go, and I have to go to Buffalo for a reading tonight, but is there any books or things that you'd recommend?
No, I'm sort of in between books at the moment. I was about to read this book, Tentacle. Do you know this one that's coming
I
out?
think so.
It's sci-fi by a Cuban writer whose name
It's showing up here. Rita, Indiana. Yeah,
Rita.
I have seen this.
But I was going to read it, and then I was like, oh, but it doesn't come out for like 4 months, so I need to find something more pressing to read that will come out next week.
Oh, yeah, I suppose that you have to do that more so than I do. I think I have this book somewhere because I've seen the cover. I have set it aside. The one that came in yesterday, I'm curious about, is the Nocilla trilogy. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's like Nocilla, Nocilla trilogy. Or am I spelling this right? Yes. That's from Augustín Fernández Mallo. That FSG is doing in like a 3-volume, one slipcase sort of thing. So about 600 pages long. It comes out in February, according to this. It comes out in January, according to the galley. But it looks pretty wild and like sort of experimental and strange. It's from a Spanish author that includes like Enrique Villamatas as a character at one point in the book. Lots of good blurbs. I'm sort of curious about reading that. Ben Marcus blurbed it even. And I think I might. I'm debating on what to do. I've almost finished with Shelley Jackson's new book, Riddance, which is pretty interesting about like a school for stammerers that basically like this headmistress believes that through stammering the dead speak through you. It's got a lot of like things about mapping the afterlife, and it's good. It's good. But then I've been struggling through the Pessoa book, which I like and don't like all at once and causes me consternation. But then I was going to read a bunch of the books I'm going to be teaching, the ones that I hadn't got to, but I kind of feel like taking December and just reading books that I feel like I just want to read for fun. Have 1 month of the year that could just be like, yeah, because I still got to catch up on the articles I was supposed to write for the weekly thing, and I have a plan. I have a good one that's going to come that's going to be really funny about I'm not even going to give it away, but you might enjoy it because it's got a very specific beginning point, which is someone from a big press wrote like a note to a bookseller about why they needed this book, and that note is so funny to me that I think I can structure a whole article around it. But I need to finish those, so I feel like I should keep reading like new translation each week. But I feel like December should just be for fun.
I think that's fair. You've earned it.
I can take a month and read like mystery novels and whatever else.
Right.
No one will die.
I have to go to work, so
yeah, have fun. I got to go to Buffalo, see this reading and visit Talking Leaves, which you'll be seeing next week.
Yes, and
it's only one store left. The other one's closed, so
yeah. All right, this was fun, if not depressing.
Yeah, it's always both, isn't it? Also, I would recommend Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I fucking love that show. I binge watched that straight through.
Not gonna happen.
I don't do. It's awesome. It's not quite the same as Riverdale awesome. It's different awesome, but they're both great. Anyways, okay, next time on Monday, live recording. We should just stream that shit straight through YouTube and do it that way.
Might be offensive just how much we drink in the course of an hour.
Oh, no, that's exactly what it should be for. It's going to be fun. Okay, talk to you soon, man.
Later.